Alright, welcome back. So in this class, we're going to talk about what is a class and what is an ID. This is a super important topic because classes and IDs are something that you're going to use throughout the entirety of the course from right at this point in time. So listen very carefully. Alright, so let's get started. So firstly, I have my HTML document ready. It's a blank page. I'm going to say H1, my favorite heading one. Alright, save, go back, and there it is, my heading. Now I want to style this heading. We already know how to do that. We can say H1 and style it in the style tag or in the style attribute or in the style.css file. I'm going to say other H1. I can say my not so favorite heading. Alright, so this heading is my favorite one, so I want to give it special treatment. So how do I do that? So the one way which I can do that is by adding something called as a class. Alright, a class, and I'm going to give a name to the class. Okay, so before I jump any further, let me give you a brief idea about what is a class and what is an ID. Alright, so for example, let us consider your own classroom. For example, whenever students are in a class represents the same type of people, right? All of these are human beings, all of these are students basically. Now, this is a class. It basically means it basically represents the same type of people, right? A ID or your roll number or your ID number, for example, is going to be unique to one student or to you yourself, right? So a class is something that is common. A ID is something that is unique. All right, perfect. So now that we have that, I'm going to add a class of, I'm saying, fav heading. All right, the name of the class is favorite heading. This is an attribute. I'm going to give it the favorite heading. And now what I can do is I can go to CSS. I can go to my style.css. I can say dot favorite heading color dark golden rod. Apparently that's a color. Save, go back. What is happening? Let's just analyze what happened here. The reason it's not working is every single time this is something that a lot of developers forget, and I also did that. So the reason why it's not working is we have to link the CSS file to our index.html. All right, do not forget this. All right, so we're going to go to the head. I'm going to say link. I can say style sheet. I can just say style.css. That's fine. I can now, if I go back, it finally works. All right. So next time, if your style is not working, just check if you have linked your style sheet to your index.html. All right. So now what you can see is only the first heading has a style applied to it, right? The reason is we gave it a class of favorite heading. Now, any element with the class of favorite heading is going to get all of the styles of this attribute. All right. So one more small thing that I have to mention is we are going to indicate to CSS that it is a class by saying a dot, right? We usually indicate, elements by saying h1, this just say paragraph, right? But if we are talking about a specific element and we're talking about a specific class, we're going to say dot and then the class name. So now what I want to do is, let us say I have a paragraph and inside the paragraph I have some text in it. And if I apply this class, if I say class fav heading to this paragraph, and if I save and if I go back, this paragraph is also going to have the same exact style of this heading because both of these have the same class, which means all of these are similar elements. We are basically saying, to the CSS file that, all of these elements are similar, just style them in the same way. All right, if I just say text align center, both of these are going to be aligned in the center. All right, so that is a class, but a ID is the exact opposite. ID basically means it is unique and it is unique to this element only. You're going to use ID whenever there is a very special case scenario, but in terms of developing bigger and bigger websites, you usually use class because a lot of elements need to look a lot more similar because that is going to maintain uniformity in the website. So class is something that is very optimal. ID is also very useful. So let's also look at how to use an ID. All right. So we are going to say ID, and inside the ID, I'm going to say just heading or regular heading. This heading is nothing special. It's just regular. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to go to the style, and to attach some properties to the heading, we are going to say hash, and this hash regular heading, and I can say color is dark red, and just that's it. Save, and if I go back, this second heading is dark red. So one more small thing which I want to remind you here is, if you remember our navigation section in the HTML, the navigation part, we used this ID. Do you remember that? So we just said we had an anchor tag, and in the reference or in the address, we said hash of the ID. All right. So that basically means that, it is searching for this ID, right? It's searching for the element with this particular ID. And since the ID is unique, and since the ID is related to only one single element, the page is going to be able to navigate to that particular part without any problem. But if you use something sort of like a class, something around that, what is going to happen is a lot of elements are going to contain the same class, so the page might get confused, or the page is going to show you the first class that it finds. But since an ID is unique, we are going to use ID in terms of the in-page navigation. All right, so I hope that kind of refresh your memory in terms of HTML navigation, and that is how we are going to use classes and IDs. All right, I'll see you in the next class. Hey, and welcome back. So in this video, we're going to talk about something called as CSS priorities. Okay, what is a CSS priority? All right, before I tell you that, I hope you remember the previous class, which is the difference between, or the basic definition of what is a class and what is an ID. This is going to be very, very important for this particular video. So if you have not watched the previous video, go back, sit down, watch the entire video, because that is one of the very, very crucial concepts in terms of CSS. All right, so now that you're here, I assume that you know what a class is and what an ID is. So we're going to go further. In this video, like I said, we're going to talk about something called as CSS priorities. Okay, so I have a basic HTML template set up here. I also have a style.css file, and I'm going to remove everything from it. And before we go any further, one main check that you have to do is, have you linked your CSS file to your HTML? That is one of the main, very, very important things that you have to check. We forgot that in the previous class. Now we're not going to do that same mistake again, and there it is. All right. So in this, so what we're going to do is, for example, I have a H1. I'm going to say this is a massive heading, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to open up my live server. And for opening up the live server, you can either go right click and open with live server, or you're going to have an option on the bottom called as go live. All right. So I'm just going to click on go live. It's going to open up the browser automatically for me. And there it is. Right, I'm going to create a new window. I'm going to throw my browser onto the new window, and we're all set. All right, so I have my massive heading, and what I'm going to do is, inside my style.css, I'm going to add some style to my heading. I'm going to say color is dark slate gray, something around that. Okay, so I hope you can see the difference from black to this. Let's just change it to something that we can easily identify. Purple. Yeah, so there is our heading with our style. All right, so now what I want to do is, okay, so now I have a heading, and I've set the color of the heading to purple. Now, for example, I change my mind, or there is a huge line of CSS, and after the huge line of CSS, I'm like, massive CSS, so I did not know, I totally forgot that, I wrote that the heading style is purple. Now, when I go back, and if I write again, or if I try to assign the property, the color again to red, what is going to happen? I'm going to save, but before I show you the result, I want you to guess, is it going to be red or is it going to be purple? All right, so if I go back, it's red. All right, why is that? In spite of what we wrote on the top, CSS basically executes from a top to bottom approach. All right. So it's going to execute each and every single line from the top to the bottom, right? So for that reason, what happens is, once you set the color to purple, CSS actually sets the heading color to purple, then it gets a second instruction saying that, hey, you know what, change it to red. So it's going to change the heading style to red. All right. So this is very, very similar to how a Python code executes. So when you write a program in Python, the compiler also compiles it in a very, very similar fashion. So it's going to compile it line by line by line. All right. So CSS also compiles the entire thing line by line by line. So the latest one is what it accepts. All right. So that is the first main rule you have to remember. I would suggest you write it down because it's going to be very, very important. And if you forget this, when you're creating websites, when you're creating multiple big websites, this is going to cause you a huge amount of headache if you're not organized or if you don't remember these particular rules. All right. So rule number 2 or priority number 2. The priority number 2 is, so for now we have this heading, and let's just say I have another heading. This is a second massive heading. Oops, and there it is. There is my second heading. And now if you see, both the headings are in red. The reason being the CSS, basically it's kind of like telling, put the heading color to red. All right. But now if I add a class to this second heading, I can say second, and I can save it, and I'm going to go back to my style.css, and you know how to target classes, right? You're going to say dot for a class and hashtag for an ID. I'm going to say dot second, and I want this color, oops, this is not column rule, color to be sea green. All right. I'm going to save, go back, and the second heading obviously turns sea green. All right. So let me tell you one small thing. Now, if I take since I already told you that, CSS executes from a top to bottom approach, what would happen if I remove this from here and if I place it at the top of the style sheet? I'm going to save, and once again, before I show you the result, I want you to guess whether the color will be sea green, whether it will be purple, or whether it will be red. All right. So if you guessed sea green, then you're right. All right. Why does this happen? Obviously, since CSS executes from the top to the bottom, the last thing or the last command it should receive is set all heading to red, right? Well, this is the exact thing or exact meaning of a CSS priority. All right. CSS prioritizes a class more than a general style tag or a style statement. All right. So this H1 is a very generalized style statement, right? We are applying it to all of H1s, but this class or this particular class or this particular property is very specific to a certain set of elements. Remember, the class is a group of elements, whereas the ID is one single element. It's unique. ID is unique, right? So when I say class, it's a group of elements, but it's still unique from a lot of elements inside the website. Hence, CSS prioritizes the class first. All right. So in your kind of like, rule book or in your notes, write down class has a greater priority than general style sheet. All right. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you one more thing. So what if I add an ID to this? All right. So one more small thing is an element can have an ID and a class. So it doesn't matter. HTML is not going to restrict you or it's not going to say you cannot have multiple, you can have. And the best part about this is you can also have multiple classes, which I'm going to show you at the end of this lecture. But for now, let's add an ID. All right. The ID is going to be special. Let's just say I have an ID of special, right? I'm going to save and I'm going to take this ID. And if I go back to my style sheet, and for ID, you remember how to represent it, right? By using a hashtag. Hashtag special, and color is going to be tomato. Yeah, somewhere approximately red. All right. Save, go back, and I hope you can see the difference. The top heading is perfectly red, whereas the second heading is tomato color. Let's just change it because it's a bit difficult to see. Let's just change it to blue. Yeah. All right. So here what I need you to observe is this H1 element or the second massive heading element has both a class as well as a ID. Now in terms of uniqueness, IDs are unique than classes, right? So that is the reason, once again, CSS prioritizes IDs more than classes. Now we have the rule extended. ID is greater than classes and classes is greater than general statements. All right. So ID once again is very, very in the top priority in terms of the CSS execution. whereas class comes in second and the generalized CSS comes in at last. Alright, now one more small thing. What if I want to override all of this? Is there something that CSS prioritizes even more than an ID? Yes, there is. And that is the internal style attribute. So if I say style and if I say color and if I go ahead and click on, let's just put it to black. All right. If I put it to black and if I save and if I go back, there it is. So once again, let's revisit the entire rule, and this time the internal style attribute or the style attribute is greater than the ID, and the ID is greater than the class, and the class is greater than the generalized statement. All right. So this is how kind of like, CSS prioritizes things. So always remember this, because when you're creating websites, once your website has a lot of elements, it's going to be very difficult if you do not understand this particular fundamental. All right. So this was your entire, the CSS priority thing. All right. So like I promised, I'm going to talk a little bit about multiple classes. So for example, I can have another class just like second. I can just say heading class, right? I can save and I can go back. The reason why we would want multiple classes to an element is, what I can do is I can just say heading, and each heading I can say it should be aligned to the center, right? Save and go back. Now the second heading is aligned to the center. Now I can use the same exact class for the first heading as well. Save, and this is it. All right. So what's basically happening is, for all the headings, we want them to be in the center. That is a common CSS property. But for the second heading, we want something else. We want it to also look a certain color. If I remove black as well as if I remove the ID, it's going to change its color to green, right? So all the headings, I need them to be in center. But for the second heading, I want it to also have a different color. Alright, so in that cases, you can use a generalized class for all headings, and whenever you need some additional in terms of input or additional styling, you can have, or you can add additional classes to that particular element as well. So that is the beauty of CSS, or that is the beauty of HTML or web development in general. So alright, so I hope you learned something new in this one, and I'll see you in the next one.